So I went home and I got my bottles and I got her some random drug paraphernalia of some sort. And I waited for 10 days for my sister to get home from treatment for the two of us to relapse together. And she got home from that treatment center and I showed her everything that I had amassed. I was like, thank God, like tonight we were relapsing, right? At that point, I'd been sober for 50 days against my will. And she looked at me and she said the damnedest thing. She said, I had a thing happen the last couple of days in the treatment center. The counselor said I had a spiritual experience and we have to stay sober. And I said, what are you talking about? And she said, I had a thing and the counselor said it was a spiritual experience and we need to stay sober. And I said, no, we don't. I don't even know what those words mean. We're relapsing tonight. And she said, no, we're not relapsing tonight. She said, we're going to go to Alcoholics Anonymous. I said, Alcoholics Anonymous, you don't even drink. She said, I know, but the counselor said that NA sucks, so we have to go to AA. That's how I ended up in Alcoholics Anonymous.
Well, hello, friends of Bill W. and other friends. You have landed on Sober Speak. My name is John M. I am an alcoholic, and we are glad you're all here, especially newcomers. Newcomers, that is, both to recovery as a whole and newcomers to this podcast. Sober Speak is a podcast about recovery centered around the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. My job here on Sober Speak is simple. My job is to provide a platform to the amazing stories of recovery all around us. Consider Sober Speak, if you will, your meeting between meetings. Please remember, we do not speak for AA or any 12-step community. We represent only ourselves. We are here to share our experience, strength, and hope with those who wish to come along for the ride. Take what you want and leave the rest at the curb for the trash man to pick up. Greetings from Studio AA, deep in the heart of Texas. That was the voice of Deb H that you heard at the beginning of this here episode, and you are going to hear so much more from her in just a moment. I know you're going to enjoy this one in the next episode, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. But first things first, this here episode is made possible by Audrey, Mary Lynn, Timothy, and Laura. What, you may ask? Did Audrey and Mary Lynn and Timothy and Laura do? Well, they ventured to our little website, humble little website, I may say, www.soberspeak.com. They scrolled to the bottom of the page and at this point in time and clicked on the little yellow donate tab and made a contribution. So thank you, Audrey, Mary Lynn, Timothy, and Laura. This here episode is coming right out to you. I, John M., as a reminder, just another bozo on the bus, will be the chairperson for this meeting between meetings, and I am truly honored and privileged to serve all of you listening in. So take a seat around this virtual table and let's get started. So, have had a interesting couple of weeks. I found myself last night saying to myself, so first of all, oh gosh, how do I say this? You know, I struggle with things, when I say with things, with self-talk, I guess is how you would put it. Like, you know, I'm not good enough. I'm going to embarrass myself. I'm going to embarrass me. I'm just not cut out for this. You know, there's the old joke of, they say, God says he won't give you more than you can handle, but sometimes I think he's got me confused with the wrong guy, because this is really meant for people who are more well-equipped than I to handle it. But I've been on an emotional roller coaster over the last couple weeks, a spiritual roller coaster. But my friend Casey W. I've heard one. I was actually texting with him once, and I don't want to tell his story, but I'll just say this: he was going through some challenges himself, and what he said was, he texted back and said, "You guys have prepared me well for this." And what he meant by "you guys" was Alcoholics Anonymous, friends, family. And that's what I feel about these last couple of weeks. You never know exactly when the wave is coming, but the wave came full and it came strong. And I found myself last night saying, I just want my life back. That's what I was saying to myself. And then I thought to myself, wait a sec. You have a good life. This is a matter of perspective. Just pause, look around to see what you have and what you can be grateful for. There's nothing wrong with the life that you have. Lean into this, right? Lean into this stress, into this worry, into this fear, into this anxiety, and see what lessons there are to learn from this time in your life. I was just out right before I started recording our little dog, who I've gotten to be much more affectionate of since we first got her about a year ago. She needed to go potty outside, and so I took her outside, and it's sunny today, and she just sat herself down in the sun and kind of rolled over and just started sunbathing, and did that for like 5 minutes. She was just soaking it up, and I just sat there with her and just kind of stared at her, and we stared at each other, and it was just a moment to pause and to be grateful. What I have learned recently is that I guess a couple things that I'm thinking of. Number one is that what I've been doing when this resentment, fear, anxiety crop up is just to sit with it, and for me, this kind of works to have a conversation with it and said, I see you, fear. I know that you're there. I understand. This is just part of life. Let's just sit with this here, me and you together, and see if this passes. And generally speaking, it does. I was reading a meditation this morning, and I go back and forth between several things that I do, but it reminded me that God has never promised me a life free from stress and worry, but He has said that He will never leave me. There is one who has all power. That one is God. May you find Him now. And so when I'm able to bring my worries, all these storms that I experience, to God and sit with Him in it, I do much better than trying to, quote, figure it out. Because when I'm trying to figure it out and my mind is on overdrive, it is not a good scenario. My friend Chad says, I heard him say in meetings many times, he says, if overthinking were a drug, I would be effed up all the time. And I get that. My mind is trying to kill me on a consistent basis. And I don't mean that I know we have a mind, and it's good to use our mind, and our mind is, given to me by God. But it's just when I go out of bounds of using it in the right way that there seems to be a challenge, a big challenge. Okay, now on to our featured guest of the week. Thanks for bearing with me through that. Deb H. This is part 1 of Deb H. And we're calling this a surprise spiritual experience. That just reminded me of Gomer Pyle when he goes, surprise, surprise, surprise. Anyway, this one's called Surprise Spiritual Experience. And as you heard me say there, that's part one. We will have the second half, part two of Deb H next week, and you're not going to want to miss either. But anyway, in this first part, Deb, by the way, is from Akron, Ohio. And by the way, there was a newcomer in our meeting the other day, and apparently he'd never heard of Akron, and he said Akron or something like that. And I thought, that seems like it's the way to pronounce that. I would never call that Akron if I had not heard that my whole life. And maybe I'm saying it wrong. I don't know. But, there should be a U in there if it's an Akron. But anyway, she's from Akron, Ohio, which, as many of you will know, is the birthplace of Alcoholics Anonymous. Deb has been sober since 1987. She sobered up at 15 years old after beginning her drinking career at 9 years old. From the opening audio clip you heard there, you'll see that Deb talks about the relationship with her sister and the surprise spiritual experience that her sister had, which turned out to be a real buzzkill for Deb. Deb talks about life with an alcoholic father, her chance encounter with AA royalty, I guess we'd call him, which is Dr. Bob's son, when she was at Dr. Bob's house in Akron, Ohio, and much, much more. Ladies and gentlemen, this is part one of Ms. Deb H. Enjoy this, and we will have plenty listener feedback at the end of this episode. Enjoy. Okay, everybody. So today we are sitting here with Deb H. And I'm just going to go ahead and let Deb H. introduce yourself, give your sobriety date if you wish, and tell people where you live in this great land of ours, please.
Absolutely. Nice to be with you today. My name's Deb H. I live in Akron, Ohio. My sober date is March 15th, 1987.
March 15th, 1987. Well, that's been a while, huh?
It has been a while. I can guarantee you I was not planning on being an Alcoholics Anonymous this long.
Well, first thing, I want to go ahead and say how we came across each other. I recorded somebody, her name is Cindy with a Y, M. She did an absolute great job, and that she recommended that I reach out to you, which I did. And we've been back and forth for a little while, but now we're able to hook up here and get a recording. So how do you know Cindy?
So Cindy and I met, obviously, carrying the message of Alcoholics Anonymous at various locations around the country, became big fans of one another. And now she is my sponsor. So she and I get to walk shoulder to shoulder on this thing.
And I think I actually know her sponsor. In fact, I just recorded her live here in the Dallas area. Jennifer HK. Do you know her?
Yeah. So Cindy sponsors Jennifer too.
Oh. That's the way it goes. I was in the ballpark. And so you said you live in Akron, Ohio, I guess birthplace, if you will, of Alcoholics Anonymous. When you were growing up, did you realize the significance of where you were? Or by the way, did you grow up there, or do you just live there now?
Yes. So I grew up about 15 minutes outside of Akron. I grew up out in the country in one of the tiny little towns out there. And, but I got drunk out there, and then I got sober, in and around the Akron area. So the old timers, really the second generation AA members who were around at the time, they were the old folks showing up in my driveway, waiting for me to get in the car and taking me to meetings. And I'll tell you, so just a quick side note. Yeah. So the very first time I went to Dr. Bob's house, it was in 87. It was at Founders Day. So I got sober in the middle of March. This is close to the middle of June. And some folks who were hauling me around and taking me places I didn't want to go. They take me up here to Founders Day, and we go to Dr. Bob's house. Now, I don't know who Dr. Bob is. I don't know anything about the history of Alcoholics Anonymous. None of it. And I'm looking and I'm like, you mean this guy was a doctor? Because I'm like, it's this tiny little house
Right.
and not very nice, right? Because
No.
I have this impression of, how doctors should live their lives. And you have to remember too, I was 15 years old when I got sober. So I was 16. I turned 16 when I came to Dr. Bob's for the first time. And we and the members of Alcoholics Anonymous had just formed the foundation and bought the house back a couple of years prior to that. So it wasn't fully renovated or fully restored or any of that yet. And anyway, all of the folks who brought me, they went in, to have inside the house. And I said, I'm not going in there. There's too many people. It's hot. I don't understand why we're here. I don't know who this doctor guy is. So I'll just be out here waiting for you when you're done. And so there's a porch swing on the front porch for, those, anybody who's been there. There's this lovely porch swing. And there's one old guy sitting on the porch swing. And there's a spot open next to him. So I walked up to him and said, can I sit here? And he said, sure. And I did. And people kept coming up and talking to him like he knew something. And so I looked at him and I said, are you from here? And he said, yeah, I grew up here in Akron. And I said, okay. I said, who's this doctor guy? And why am I here? And he said, well, he's one of the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I was like, okay, but was he an actual medical doctor? And he said, yes, he was an actual medical doctor. And I said, well, he couldn't have been a very good one. This is a very small house. And he said, I think his alcoholism really stopped him from being probably, as successful as he could have been. And I said, I guess so. I said, but so why are we here again? And he said, well, he's one of the co-founders. And I said, well, did you know him? And he said, yes, I knew him. And I said, well, was he at least a nice guy? Did you like him? And he said, I didn't really care for him that much. I said, you didn't? Why didn't you care for him? And he said, well, I asked him for his daughter's hand in marriage. And because my dad was a janitor, he didn't think that I was high enough up in society. And so he wouldn't let me marry her.
Uh-huh.
And I said, really? I said, well, why are you on the porch now? Are you in AA? And he said, I'm not in AA. And I said, well, why are you here? And he said, I had to wait for the old man to die, but he did. And I finally got to marry the love of my life.
Oh.
And at that moment, Sue and Smitty, Dr. Bob's children, stepped out onto the front porch.
Wow.
Yes, I was sitting there with Ray, who was Sue's second husband. Because, she had been married to AA number 4 for 24 years.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Very wow.
I know, it was really great. Anyway, the old people who had taken me up there, they were a little worried when they stepped out on the porch and saw that I was sitting there with, AA dignitaries. So they squirreled me away before I could do too much more damage.
I have been there. What I remember about it is number one, and I know this was not because I asked them. There was actually 12 steps coming up to the right, but they put that in afterwards, is what I understand. Right? It wasn't because I thought, wow, really 12 steps, but I think when they were remodeling it, they did. And the other thing that I remember was a couple of things. Number one was his bedroom upstairs, like you said, very, very quaint, nothing significant at all. And I remember standing in that room and actually kind of coming to tears thinking about, what had happened there. And then the other thing is they have that Bible out in the living room with James there. What's the verse again? That,
yeah. Faith without works is dead.
That's right. That's right.
In the book of James.
Yeah. So I remember all of that. Well, cool. Okay. So the other thing I wanted to ask you about real quick, you and I were going kind of back and forth for a while, trying to get you scheduled. And you had mentioned that I think you said you were going to Alaska on a motorcycle, if I'm not mistaken.
I was. Yeah. So, I've actually been twice. This was, in August of this year, so 2023, I went back to Alaska on my motorcycle for a second time. So I left from Akron, had a couple of friends with me, an AA guy from Maryland and another from Florida. And then we hooked up with a couple of others just outside of Glacier National Park.
Okay.
And then we rode to Alaska and around, and yeah, it was great. It was a great trip. We were on the road for 5 weeks.
Wow. Okay,
Yeah.
so what do you do? Do you just find like a little place to sleep in? Do you camp outside? How do you, just take me through the trip?
Yeah. So 20 years ago, we did some camping because we couldn't afford to do hotels for a month. 20 years forward, I can afford to do hotels for, every night. And so indeed, that's what we did. And the Alaska Highway and really the trek all the way through Canada and then onto and through the Alaska Highway, it's set up so that there are stops along the Alaska Highway every 140 to 160 miles.
Mm.
And at those stops, you can usually find a gas pump, a restaurant, and often a place to sleep.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we kind of charted our path. And since I had ridden it 20 years prior, I had a little bit of working knowledge about what that was going to take.
Yeah.
And so we were able to go to do a little bit of booking ahead of time. And then some of them we just kind of, bumped in on the fly when we needed to.
Wow, very cool. So you did that all the way up and all the way back, and it took that is have you always been a motorcycle girl?
Yeah. Okay. So another quick story. So I was sober for a couple of months. My sponsor, her name was Jane, and Jane was an old timer in years and in Alcoholics Anonymous. She and another guy who I was convinced was the president of Alcoholics Anonymous. Those two were in charge of my life. Anyway, I was talking to Jane because I had to call her regularly, like is often required of newcomers to their sponsors. And I called her and she required that I tell her something, right? Because I was I said I was a private person. What I really was I was evading being held accountable for any poor behavior, right? So I just wouldn't tell her anything. So she said, no, you have to call and share something with me. So I got into the habit where I would call and I would complain to her about my current circumstance because I wanted to get a little sympathy. And so I'm whatever, 15 or 16 years old at the time. And I am calling and complaining because I said, well, that's what you asked me to do. And she stopped me in the middle of the conversation and she said, would you just tell me something that you want? Something that you're going to have to work for. But what do you want in this life? And she dumbfounded me because I wasn't raised in a way where people were interested in what my hopes and dreams were. Like we didn't talk in those terms, right? My life, the way I grew up was about just kind of getting through the day, and figuring out a way to accept the current circumstance. And the more you want, the more disappointment you will feel, kind of thing. And so anyway, so she dumbfounded me and I thought for a second and I said, fine, I want to be skinny. And I want a Harley Davidson motorcycle. And she said, well, quit eating French fries, get a job in an empty coffee can and call me back. And she hung up on me. And I was like, oh my God, that's so rude. Like, is it even legal for people to hang up on you like this? Anyway, so I got off French fries for a couple of days. I got a job waitressing at an ice cream shop, which was counterintuitive to the whole French fry thing. I understand. I went to my home group and got the empty coffee can and I called her and I said, fine, now what? And she said, work every Tuesday, put Tuesday's tips in the can. And I said, well, what is that going to do? Right? Because like a full shift at the ice cream shop, I would make like $6,
Mm-hmm.
And she said, well, if you put Tuesday's tips in the can, one day you'll buy a Harley Davidson motorcycle out of that can. And I said, that's going to take forever. And she said, it will if you never start. And she hung up on me again. Oh, anyway, so 5 years forward, I'm getting ready to turn 21 years old. And anyway, and I counted my can. My buddy Rat, who was a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, right? Because everybody's got to have a buddy named Rat, right? And so Rat called me and he said, hey, darling, I found a little Harley for you. Count your can. So for my 21st birthday, I paid cash for a little Harley Davidson motorcycle. And that was over 30 years ago now. And so I've been riding Harleys now for over, and I have a Harley that runs today. The first one that I bought out of the can, it didn't really run all that much. But yeah, well, I have two of them today, and both of them, they actually start when I push the button, which is important. So that's how I became a biker.
That's great. That's great. All right, so let's go back a little bit here and start. Okay, first of all, you've already mentioned. I think you said you got sober at what, 15 or 16? Is that right?
Yeah, I was 15 when I got sober.
Okay, so you're 15 years old. So you must have had an active adolescence. Is sounding like.
I like to say that I was a little difficult to raise. We call that a Midwestern understatement.
Okay, so I don't know. Take me back. Your mom, your dad, getting up to 16. You give me a thumbnail sketch of what happened during those years.
Gotcha. So, I said I was raised in a little town not far from Akron. It had like a population of less than 5,000 people. Most of those folks came out of the hills of West Virginia when the coal mines started closing down. And that's where my dad's family came from. My mom's family came out of the hills of Pennsylvania. So very much a blue collar family. My dad was in the union. My mom worked harder than he did, but a non-union, factory lifestyle, that kind of thing. And yeah, so it's this tiny town. My dad was one of 9 kids. And 8 of the 9 lived in that little town, along with, first cousins and second cousins and third cousins. So I was related to most of the town. And when they came out of the hills of West Virginia to Ohio, they also brought generational alcoholism with them.
Mm.
And so my grandfather died before I was born. He died. He had cirrhosis, black lung, and throat cancer. They're not really sure what killed him. But it was kind of one of those hard charged lifestyles.
Right.
Anyway, my dad had a horrible case of alcoholism that never did get treated. And when I was a little kid, it was just me and my sister. My sister is not quite 2 years older than I am. She and I, we looked alike. My mom used to dress us like twins when we were little. We were absolutely thick as thieves. She had always been my person. There wasn't a scam I was running when she didn't have my back, or vice versa. Anyway, so we're growing up in this, this little house. So we lived on, how in little railroad towns, which my town was a little railroad town, there's always kind of a right side of the tracks and a wrong side of the tracks. Right.
Right.
And so we were on the first block on the right side of the tracks, which means that we could see the wrong side of the tracks. We could see it, smell it, hear it. We were kind of, attracted to it and kind of part of it, but we were on the right side of the tracks. Anyway, so my sister and I were growing up in this house. The only higher power that was present in that house that I could see was my dad's anger and his alcoholism. And so I grew up and I was literally terrified of everything. There are pictures of me when I'm a little kid, and literally my shoulders are attached to my ears. My little hands are balled up in fists, and I'm just living life on high alert because I don't know when something is going to go wrong, but I know something will go wrong. And so I've got to be ready, right? I got to duck or dodge or run or sit or hide or something. There will be a response required from me. And it's going to come, from him and from that alcoholism and from just that incessant anger that goes with being buried in alcoholism and not seeing a way out of it. Anyway, and so that was childhood. But at the same time, and sometimes I forget to mention this, I also had a really dedicated mom. Like, there are some people that don't have the anchor of knowing that they were loved, but I had that anchor. My mom, no matter what was going on, she couldn't always protect us, and she couldn't always do what she really wanted to do on our behalf. But we always knew that she wanted to, and we always knew that she loved us. And so we had this true juxtaposition of the two parents in the household. Anyway, I had my first drink of alcohol when I was 9 because I was curious. Like, I literally just wanted to know what that stuff was in those dark little bottles, because my dad drank Strohs in the little brown bottles.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to know, like, what is that stuff and why is it so important? Because it ran everything. It absolutely ran everything. He had to have a lot of them. It was really important to my mom that he never have another one. My dad always smelled like beer. My mom always hated it.
Mm.
It was just constant conflict. And I just want to know what that stuff was. And I was the kind of kid that if you didn't answer my questions, I was going to go figure it out for myself. And I had my first drink of alcohol because I was just figuring things out. I was, I remember there was a moment when nobody would answer my questions. I was about 6 years old. And so I used to play like I was sleeping in the room where the adults were. And once they thought I was asleep, then they would start talking about what was really going on.
Mm.
And so I would play sleep, or I would hide under or behind things so that I could overhear the conversation, because I knew that I needed to know what was going on and nobody would ever tell me. And anyway, I fell asleep under the Christmas tree when I was hiding. That's why that came to mind right now. And I was asleep for I really did fall asleep that time. But anyway, I knew that this drinking thing was a problem for everyone. My dad's his rage and his outbursts were a thing. I didn't know if they were connected to the liquid he was drinking all the time, but I knew that it was a player. And so I spent the night with one of my girlfriends. Her parents had a bar in their basement, which is how we roll here in Ohio. And just started picking bottles off the bar. We take the caps off, and if we could get past the smell, then we would swallow some of it. And that was my very first drink, and I have no idea how much I had to drink, none of that. Cause it was,
Were you so was it you and your girlfriend?
Yep. Just me and my girlfriend.
Was she drinking too?
She was drinking too, but in her house, her parents, even though they're the ones with the bar, they really did have a take it or leave it attitude toward alcohol. They would drink some, they would have friends over, they'd listen to music, they would have a great time, no big deals. If they were drinking something fruity, they would give the kids a sip. It wasn't a taboo. It wasn't running anything. Alcohol was in a different posture in her house. And so to her, she didn't understand why I wanted to try this drinking thing, but she was like, yeah, whatever. And I've always been a little pushy and ran everything I touched. And so she was just going to go along with me. Yeah, but I tell you, to her, it wasn't a big deal, other than the fact that she was mad at me the next day, right? Because I got drunk, acted badly, clearly said some things that I couldn't remember the next day. And then I was sick and couldn't really help her, clean up after ourselves. So it was a big night.
Have you been able to talk to her in adulthood since you came into the program?
I have not talked to her at all since I think 13 is when they moved away.
Gotcha. So they moved away. Okay.
Yeah.
No big deal.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're taking this drink at 9. How was it?
It changed everything, because it was, it was my first drink, my first drunk, my first blackout, my first hangover. But what happened was, it was the first time that I felt the effect produced by alcohol. And it was magical for me. And it wasn't magical because it made me whatever, right? Taller, older, more charismatic, none of that stuff, right? Because I was a kid. What it did for me is it allowed me to exhale all the way for the very first time. My little hands let loose. My shoulders came all the way off my ears. I exhaled all the way. I didn't realize that I hadn't been, fully inhaling and exhaling until I got to exhale all the way. And that happened because what alcohol did for me was it gave me a break from being terrified. It just gave me a moment. You know how when you're having one of those days and people keep coming at you and you're like, I just need a minute, right? You know how you have even today, right? We have those days like, just back off. I just need a freaking minute. I was 9 years old and I just needed a freaking minute. And alcohol gave it to me. It just absolutely gave it to me. And I made a decision that day. I said, I'm going to drink as much of this stuff as often as I can. I mean, why wouldn't I? But the other thing that happened for me that night, though, is that my allegiance, if you will, switched from my mom to my dad, because I understood why he was drinking all the time. And I said, if she would just leave him alone, and stop nagging at him all the time.
Oh no.
Or maybe if she would just have a bottle of beer with him, right? Because that woman was wound tight, right? If she would just take a drink and stop hounding him all the time, maybe he wouldn't be so angry.
Yeah.
Because I had no understanding of alcoholism, the illness of alcoholism, right? The spiritual malady of it. I didn't understand that. I thought it was about the substance.
Wow.
Yeah.
So wild. So wild. All that happening at 9 years old. Okay. So, and you mentioned earlier, I want to go back to, you said you have been, when you touch something or when you're involved in a situation, you're usually in charge, so to speak. Has that kind of worked its way through adulthood or whatever? Was it working its way out when you were a little kid as well? Talk to me about that.
Absolutely. I say it is kind of tongue in cheek, but it's really true. I run everything I touch today. And most of the time I don't want to be running it. But somehow I end up in charge of it all. And so, which is really interesting, like in AA committees and things like that, I try to keep my distance. But yes, even when I was little in that neighborhood, like I had a posse. I ran the neighborhood, right? All of the kids, like even the simple stuff that you do in childhood, like we would build when it snowed a lot, because we used to get tons of snow when I was little, living here in Northeast Ohio. So when it snowed a lot, we would go and we would pack the snow, because I lived on a fairly extreme hill. And so we would go up to the top of the hill, which was the church parking lot. We'd start there and we'd pack the snow, and we would essentially make a slalom run down through the houses and up over the garages and all of that kind of stuff. Well, all of that had to be, crafted and created. And so I developed a process for us to create our annual sledding run. And I would oversee I was the superintendent of the project. And it's just kind of been like that most of my life. Even when I'm really, I really shouldn't be running the project. I am oftentimes in some kind of, position.
And so has that kind of worked its way into what I notice is the people that have that kind of natural leadership tendency also have a tendency to sponsor more people in Alcoholics Anonymous. Have you sponsored a lot of women because of that? I'm assuming people are drawn to you.
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. So I limit the number of women that I sponsor. So I really, I've always had very demanding positions. Today I own 2 companies, and I was literally on call for 23 years. And so I've had very demanding positions. I've had a very big AA life, always, 3-4 meetings a week kind of thing. Plus, if I could, hold a position in my home group. And I feel like I can't give a lot of women the kind of time that's really required to sponsor well if I have too many. And so I usually have 9 or 10. And I don't go over that. And I don't generally have more than a couple that are working through a set of steps at any one time.
So, yeah, that's very interesting to hear that. Everyone has a different kind of perspective on how they do that. And, you're just one person with so many hours in a day and you got to manage it. To me, it's about looking in the mirror with the God of my understanding and saying, okay, this is right for me. This is what I need to do with my time. So you're 9 and you're drinking there. Talk to me about, I guess, school life, how we're, academics and all that sort of stuff. How was that holding up? Okay.
Yeah, that was holding up fine. I never had to study at all until I hit college. And then my lack of study skills ate my lunch when I hit college, but I was getting straight A's in school. I'm an auditory learner. So as long as I have somebody who is giving a decent lecture, I will remember everything that you say.
Wow.
And I will be able to regurgitate it. I'll be able to wrap that up in a conversation with you later on. I'm an auditory learner. And so I was able to perform very well. Math always gave me a little bit of a problem, but that's just because it's not lectured.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah. So when I went into treatment, the sophomore year in high school, I had a 3.8 grade point average. I was president of my class. And I was the girl that every mom wanted her son to date. And I had not drawn a sober breath for months. So I mean, talk about keeping the plate spinning or the balls in the air, or however you want to talk about that.
It reminds me of the what's his name, Eddie Haskell or whatever, and Leave It to Beaver. Right, he came across great to the parents, but in the background there was some shady stuff going on.
Oh, totally shady, right? Like, I mean, all the girls on the volleyball team were my greatest enablers. I mean, they took some training, right? So I had to dig in with them. But volleyball two-a-days the last summer before I went to treatment, I mean, they were terrible, because I would be finishing my drinking about 5:30 or 6 a.m. and I had to be on the volleyball court at 7:15. So it was just awful. So, yeah.
Okay. So go ahead. I keep getting you off track, but so go back to, 9 and 10, 11 or 12. Was there any more significance at home? What are some of the major milestones there, or mile markers, I should say?
Yeah. From that point forward, it's all kind of a blur. I rearranged every relationship in my life. Like, I literally kind of ranked people based on whether or not you increased or decreased my access to alcohol. Because when you're a kid and drinking, you have to be really creative. Right. And so if your parents had a bar in their basement, you moved into my inner circle. If you had older siblings that would get sloppy with leftovers or something, right? Like, there were some teetotalers in my class, and I was like, I can't really hang out with them. Like, I have too much to do in my free time now. And I had no idea that was the mental obsession, right? And I don't know, that it was the sorting that had to occur in order for me to move alcohol into that position of real importance. And I did. And that was my life.
And how was your sister? What was your sister doing at this time?
Yeah. So I drank and didn't do drugs, and my sister did drugs and didn't drink. That way there was no conflict of interest between us. I mean, it really was that clean, but it wasn't intentional. But my sister, I mean, she smoked pot. She would drop acid and go to school. Like, if you rolled up and had whatever substance and said, "Hey, what do you think?" she would take it for a spin. And all of that stuff, to me, like, I knew that if I got busted with that stuff, that people would start paying a lot of attention to what I was doing. Right? Like, they might be willing to turn their head if it's just alcohol, but if it's alcohol and, then I knew that, because I watched her, she would run. We both run away from time to time. She'd get caught. She'd go to juvie, that kind of stuff, because there's always drugs involved, and she's hanging out with drug dealers and stuff. I'm just hanging out with older people who wouldn't ask any questions and buy me my own fifth of vodka and not ask why or who I really am. Right. So to me, I felt like, she was really playing with fire.
Right.
I'm drinking every day. Like, and I'm the kind of drinker where I drink until I am face down in a mud puddle. It's not pretty.
Yeah.
It's not fun. It's, I'm maintenance drinking when I'm 14. I had booze stashed all over the town. I mean, in all of the parks and all of the places, I had booze stashed everywhere. So that nobody got my entire supply away.
So I want to bring up something. So, and I've talked to people before that have gotten sober when they're very young, and they have to deal with, I don't know how to put this, some sort of sense of, when they come to Alcoholics Anonymous, you're too young, I drank more, I'm spilt on my tie than, you did, and all that sort of stuff. Talk to me about your experience with that, because I know there are going to be people out there right now that are listening to this that are very young, and they're trying to figure it all out themselves. Am I too young is kind of what it comes down to.
Yeah. Thank you. So there's a whole lot wrapped around that for me. When I walked into Alcoholics Anonymous, I had gotten in trouble. My sister and I had a series of missteps and miscalculations, like another Midwestern understatement for you. And we got in a lot of trouble. Right. And she ends up in juvie jail again. And I end up in this mess. And the school finds out and they're embarrassed because the president of the class and the straight A student who's playing 3 varsity sports, blah, 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 is now embroiled in this, big drinking, disgusting thing. And so they give me an appointment to go away to treatment. And so I'm headed to treatment and my sister's sitting in juvie jail. And anyway, I end up in this treatment center in Cleveland. I'll spare you all those details. I tried to drink myself to death rather than go to treatment. Obviously it didn't work. And I get out of that treatment center and I'm sober for 40 days against my will. 40. My sister ends up following me into that treatment center. So when I went into that treatment center, I checked in on the Saturday after Thanksgiving in 86, but I didn't come to until Monday night. So I go in there and I'm in and out of a blackout and I'm in a drunken stupor and I'm a mess. And that's when they ask me all of the questions, right? All of the questions that if you're an alcoholic of my type, you're going to lie about all of them.
Right.
Right. Like, I'm never going to tell you how much I actually drank. I mean, that's just stupid, right? Because adults are going to overreact if you tell them the truth, right? If I have a plan, I'm gonna minimize all of it. But I go in there in such a state that I don't even remember them doing the intake questions. But I had told them the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Apparently, my chart had alcoholic stamped on the front of it. And what also happened is after they were done talking to me, they called my mom and said, "Hey, we think you have another one," talking about my sister.
Oh, yeah.
And so after 10 days, they moved me down to a different unit in the treatment center and they tricked my sister into the treatment center.
What do you mean, tricked her?
So my mom tells my sister, "Hey, they're going to keep Deb for another month. And this is the only day you can go visit her. Don't you want to go visit your sister?" Well, of course she wants to come visit me. I mean, she's my person. And so she comes to the hospital in Cleveland to visit me. They get her up onto the locked unit that they had just moved me out of.
Oh, no.
The door closes and locks behind her. They gave her her own set of hospital pajamas and told her she'd be staying. And she tore the place apart. She was very unhappy. Anyway, so 10 days later, my sister gets done with her assessment period and she comes downstairs into the same treatment area where I am. And so she and we spend the next 20 days in that treatment center, and she will not speak to me. She will absolutely not speak to me. She has figured out that it is my fault that she's in there. She's holding me 100% responsible. And anyway, I can't stay past the 40-day mark in this treatment center because there's no money left. And so I'm getting on the elevator to leave. They don't believe I'm going to stay sober. I know I'm not staying sober. I'm not interested in staying sober. But my time's up and I got to go. So I'm getting on the elevator to leave and my sister grabs me. First time she had talked to me in the 20 days since we'd been in the same place together. And she said, "You do not relapse until I get out of here. It is your fault that I'm in here and you will not be out there drinking while I am in here because of you." She said, "We will relapse together when I get out of here. But if you are out there drinking without me, I will never speak to you again." So, and she had 10 days left in there. And so I went home and I got my bottles and I got her some random drug paraphernalia of some sort. And I waited for 10 days for my sister to get home from treatment for the two of us to relapse together. And she got home from that treatment center and I showed her everything that I had amassed. And I was like, thank God, like tonight we were relapsing, right? At that point, I'd been sober for 50 days against my will. I mean, talk about white knuckling it. Oh my gosh, I was a wreck. And she looked at me and she said the damnedest thing. She said, "I had a thing happen the last couple of days in the treatment center. The counselor said I had a spiritual experience and we have to stay sober." And I said, what are you talking about? And she said, "I had a thing and the counselor said it was a spiritual experience and we need to stay sober." And I said, "No, we don't."
This is not the plan.
I don't even know what those words mean. We're relapsing tonight. And she said, no, we're not relapsing tonight. She said, we're going to go to Alcoholics Anonymous. I said, Alcoholics Anonymous, you don't even drink. She said, I know, but the counselor said that NA sucks, so we have to go to AA. And I said, I don't think that's how this works. I said, I'm not going. And she said, if you don't go, I'll tell.
Oh.
That's how I ended up in Alcoholics Anonymous.
Okay. So this happens with not a lot, but some of the guests that I record. And that is, we are just now getting into Alcoholics Anonymous with you, right? We kind of have a backstory. So I'm going to ask you a favor, if you would. Can we pause now and then schedule some more time with you and have you come back for the second half of your story at another point? Would you be okay with that, Deb?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, so I always end up with, oh no, I'm looking for my big book. Hold on. I'll be right back. I see a professional podcaster, like somebody who's not rinky dink, would have had this set up beforehand. But I'm going to read from page 164 from the big book to wrap us up here. It says, abandon yourself to God as you understand God. Admit your faults to him and to your fellows. Clear away the wreckage of your past. Give freely of what you find and join us. We shall be with you in the fellowship of the Spirit, and you will surely meet some of us, like me and Deb H, as you trudge the road of happy destiny. May God bless you and keep you until then. Once again, Deb, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me.
As a reminder, we do not want you sharing your toothbrush or your gossip, but we would absolutely love for you to pause your device and share this episode with another friend or family member. It may be just what they need today. And as a reminder again, please come on back next week. Hear the second half of Deb H. You are not going to want to miss that. I promise. Now, on to a little bit of listener feedback. Tyson writes in. And Tyson says, by the way, the subject line is saving lives. And he says, hello, John. I'm writing to you from Kempner, Texas, down by Austin. And I want to say thank you for what you do. By the way, Tyson, I didn't think about this till right now, but I think there's going to be a young people's conference that I know of I think it's July 4th weekend. I know my friend KCW is going to be down there in Austin, and I may be as well. Who knows? But anyway, I know you're down by Austin. John thought of that. He says, John, I now have a year sober, and my sponsor, JD, introduced me to your work. I recently spoke at my home group, and I recommended this podcast and gave my sponsor credit for his input. I listen to you daily now, and I even take notes on all the wisdom from you and your guest. No doubt you and the people you interview are touching the hearts of a multitude of people struggling and in turn saving our lives. He says, thank you, sir. And he says, P.S. If you decide to read this on air, say, hi, JD. I love you, man. So, and Tyson E. So, JD, hi, JD from Mr. Tyson. I'm glad you're listening. I'm glad you turned him on to the podcast. And I think I sent you a message, Tyson, saying that, you know, I had a rough couple of weeks there. When I say rough, you know, it's all relative, right? When I say, for me, it was a real roller coaster of emotions. It was just my turn, right? And because of that, getting this email just absolutely made my day. I sure do appreciate it. Thank you, Tyson. And hello, JD. Errol writes in and she says, "Hi, John. I live in beautiful Bozeman, Montana. You know, I've probably mentioned this on the pod before, but there are two states within the lower 48 that I've never been to, and one of them is Montana, and one of them is South Dakota. And I am hoping to get to Montana and to South Dakota here pretty soon, but I hear it is beautiful up there." She says, "I've been sober since April 1st. Oh, that's a good April Fool's Day joke, of 2020. The AA community here is amazing. Sadly, I stepped away from AA after I had my daughter. By the grace of God, I stayed sober, but the insanity of being sober and not working the steps, doing service work, and being part of an AA community had taken its toll on me. At a low point in my insanity, I was listening to music at work and I thought maybe there's an AA podcast on iHeartRadio. I searched for podcasts and I searched and found your podcast. It brought me back from the brink. Oh man. I guess that's why we keep doing this. I'm so glad to hear that. Anyway, she says, "Thank you," with 3 exclamation points. She says, "Since that day, I've got a home group, a sponsor, and a conscious relationship with my higher power. Your show and the message I was able to hear that day, it was Darren P. from Manchester / California, spoke to me. Now I listen to your podcast at work. Thanks for spreading the message. Arlie L." Arlie, God bless you. You made my day. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for writing in. I really do appreciate it. Now, this last one here, I can't figure out if I read this last week or not. So if I read this last week or the week before, you're going to hear it again, but I don't think I did. This was a post in the Super Secret Facebook group, and Cindy says, "Today, I listened to the podcast with Gary K on the topic of complacency. I never heard this speaker before. He has a powerful message." You're right about that, Cindy. I have been pretty complacent lately, and that should always be a fear we all have. Agreed. One thing he mentioned is his daily ritual in reading the big book, pages 60 through 63 every morning, and reading pages 86 every night. What a wonderful podcast. I truly believe no matter how much time I have sober, I am at risk to go back out if I practice complacency. I agree, Cindy. She says, "Life happens and all the busy tasks can take over, but I must avoid complacency. Thank you, Gary K." Well, you latched on to one excellent speaker. I mean, there are so many good speakers that we have on the pod, and I'm just so blessed to be able to talk with them, interview them, spend time with them. But Gary K is definitely a fan favorite out there, and I'm glad that you were able to listen to him. All right, everybody, that there is the end of episode 340. What do I want to say? That's it. Keep coming back. It works if you work it. May God bless you and keep you until then. I take this all 1 week at a time. I hope to be back next week. And, also I want to make sure I get Deb H's second episode out. So in all likelihood, I'll make it unless something weird happens. But anyway, God bless y'all. Love you. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.